watching ASMR Chic. Come relax with me. Wear headphones. What's up, you guys? You are watching ASMR Chic with the one, the only, JJ, the Chic Prince. So, I just wanted to apologize for not uploading in about a week and a half or so. I've just been super busy with work and trying to get things done. But we are here now, so we can read Chapter 4 of The Adventures of Marvin Pickering, The Miracle at Weston Falls. Written and illustrated by Carl J. Van Loo. He both wrote and illustrated this book. That's him on the back right there. If you would like to check out this book for yourself, the link will be in the description below. If you don't want to pay for the book, totally fine. That's why you're here. You have the opportunity now to listen to the book. Obviously, you can't read it, you can't see it, but you will be able to listen to me whisper, read, softly, the book to you, one chapter at a time. We are currently on chapter 4, but every chapter is being uploaded and placed into a playlist. So when we have finished the entire book, every video will be in that playlist for you to enjoy. So in our last chapter, Marvin, he ran away from home, and his mom and the entire town are out looking for him. And he actually just ran into a man named John, and we're kind of speculating that maybe John might be an angel, maybe it's a figment of Marvin's imagination, maybe an invisible friend, imaginary friend, I don't know. We are going to find out though, so without further ado, let's read Chapter 4, Beyond the Gulf. Beyond the Gulf. Beyond the Gulf. That's a good timer. Okay. No more joking. Let's read. The search party awoke with the dawn. The sheriff woke earlier than the rest, had percolated coffee on the camp stove, and now drank his cup of coffee, looking quite exhausted. "Okay, guys, the time for sleep is over. Everyone up," he spoke with a stern voice, and then took another sip of fresh black coffee. The men stirred and rubbed their eyes, stretching in various contortions. "Boy, it got chilly last night. It must have been in the 40s or so. That's one of the things I'm worried about, Riley. Angela Pickering told me Marvin only had a few things on his back, as far as she knew anyway." The sheriff spoke with a genuine concern in his voice. "I hope to God he's all right. Hypothermia can severely influence a person within a couple of hours, especially the chill we had last night. Let's hope he had the brains to bring a blanket at least," Riley retorted, sounding somewhat sarcastic. Within the hour, the search party was assembled and ready to continue. "Okay, everyone, it's 6:30 a.m. Let's get moving. We have a lot of ground to cover today. I think we had better find this kid soon. I don't like the way the sky appears. It looks like rain, or worse." They split up into teams, just like the night before, with the horsemen far in the lead, heading towards the north end of the hills. This time, with daylight to assist them, it brought a fresh hope of finding Marvin. The rest of the party kept in their formation, combing the woods like ants, some heading towards the wildlife preserve area, hoping to find the runaway before nightfall. The whole group knew the Pickering family in one way or another, either through school while growing up together, or through business of some sort. The community as a whole respected them as upstanding citizens. 2 hours had passed. The equestrians had searched all of the east end of the hills, and then turned due west, heading for the pass of the hills towards the river. Mr. Hanson spoke up. "You know, I don't believe Marvin would have come way up here. It's too rocky. Let's work our way back close to the river. He'd most likely be there. What do you think?" They all agreed, then turned back, heading south along the river, searching carefully for any clues. Large, ominous clouds loomed overhead, echoing reverent, thundering through the air, and indicating rain was imminent. "Hey, Hanson, we better find this kid soon, before things get really ugly," Mr. Williams said with great concern. "I don't know who was dumber, the kid or us," Mr. Hanson complained. The team rode down the rocky slope towards the river, continuing their daunting, exhausting search, trying to remain positive that they would find the lost boy in spite of the odds. Ellen woke that morning, horribly worried about Marvin. It was 7:30 and she was up, washed and dressed, ready to do a little searching of her own. The news of Marvin's disappearance was very upsetting to her. Ellen knew Marvin. He wasn't like this, at least not often. He enjoyed his solitude, hopeless romancing through the woods, daydreaming in glass. That was as bad as he ever got. "Oh, Marvin, please be okay." Tears began to flow from her eyes as they had the night before. She shook her head and rubbed her eyes to halt them. She still had a headache from all the crying she had done. Her mother stayed with her at bedtime to console her through the sorrow and worry until she drifted off to sleep. I have to do something. Ellen felt somehow responsible for his flight. If she had just gone with him or followed from a distance to make sure he was going to be okay, perhaps then the situation wouldn't have escalated to this magnitude. Ellen ran into the kitchen. Her mother was there making breakfast, consisting of cream of wheat, sausages on the side, and orange juice. "Oh, Ellen, I was just gonna wake you up. Wow, look at you, up and dressed. That's a first." Her mother walked up to Ellen, giving her a hug. You're really worried about Marvin, aren't you?" "Yes," Ellen said with a very concerned look. "Well, I'm sure that the search party will find Marvin. They know the woods pretty good. I'd say they'll have him before the day's end." Ellen looked up to her mother, saying, "It was cold last night, wasn't it, Mom?" "Well, yes, it was a bit chilly." "How cold was it, Mom?" "The news said it was 47 degrees. Ellen looked pained that the report of the temperature was not good news. She knew that a person could freeze to death in a matter of hours when the temperature drops below 52 degrees, especially with wind chill and the lack of proper layering. "Mom, Marvin only had his jacket on. He didn't have a blanket or anything. He left for the woods when he was on his way to school." Ellen began to cry, and her mother had an extremely concerned look on her face after Ellen gave her that report. "Mom, I'm afraid Marvin might be very sick now or dead." Ellen's mother pulled her close, holding Ellen in her arms, saying, "Please don't worry, baby. He'll be all right. You'll see. Have faith, honey. They'll find him. They'll find him all right." Ellen's mother had doubts of her own. Now with the storm brewing outside, the situation looked even more dismal. Dear God, please help the men find Marvin, she thought. She had to show confidence for Ellen's sake. "Come on now, let's have some breakfast before it gets cold." Ellen couldn't eat much for breakfast. She mostly stared out the window, wondering where Marvin could be by now. Then it dawned on her. She remembered last summer Marvin and some of the local boys went out to the preserve area to camp. She recalled how Marvin raved over how beautiful the woods were in that area, over the regular haunts they visited. course I know where he is. Of course I know where he is. She leaped from her seat, ran to the door, pulled on her raincoat and boots, and then dashed out the door before her mother could restrict her. Ellen, where are you going? Her mother ran to the door. Ellen made a rapid escape. She stood in the doorway watching Ellen run off down the lane. Ellen, stop! Where are you going? You better stay out of those woods. It's going to rain. She yelled as loud as she could, but no manner of protesting could slow her. Ellen was focused on her cause. Dear God, I hope she isn't. Dear God, I hope she isn't doing what I think she's going to do. She's heading toward Weston Avenue. Peggy Peterson ran to the phone and dialed the number for the sheriff's office. With all that had happened, there was no telling how foolish her daughter might become. All she needed was for Ellen to be a runaway along with Marvin, two lost children at the same time. Weston Falls couldn't handle that much excitement, all in the same time. Ellen ran as fast as she could without stopping. She wanted to get Marvin soon, before it was too late. She had finally reached the entrance of the woods. There were several vehicles parked along the curb where the entrance of the woods met the street. There must have been a whole bunch of guys. There's a lot of cars, she said, looking at the various types of autos. This really didn't help her feel confident about Marvin being found soon. Marvin was a good camper and a scout. He had been a Cub Scout for years and was going to advance into a full-fledged Boy Scout this year. He could build all types of shelters to protect himself from all types of weather. She remembered 2 years ago, when they had a good snow, Marvin had built a snow shelter big enough for four of them to huddle up in, and they all kept surprisingly warm. She always admired how ingenious he was. Ellen tried to comfort herself with this thought, but it only caused her doubts to raise more. Thinking he might try something foolish on his own, she tried to dispel them and think positively. Marvin, I hope you're all right. I love you. I need you. Ellen stood at the entrance of the woods, terrified. She stared into the darkness that waited beyond the creepy shrubs and trees that loomed over and around it. Okay, here I go. 1, 2, 3. Then she quickly leaped into the entrance past the scary shrubbery, running down the path into the woods, hoping no large animals would grab her and eat her for breakfast. Then her lungs became winded from the long sprint, forcing her to slow to a light stroll. Suddenly she noticed something. It's not that dark in here after all, she said to herself, looking around at all the trees and plants. The flowers were in full bloom, radiating their beauty back to the sun as if everything would be just fine. Then the sun was momentarily blotted out by the dark, ominous clouds in the sky overhead. They caused the woods to become gloomy, causing an eerie feeling to overcome her spirit. Rain, why now, of all times? She complained. The clouds rumbled out thunder, and there was a sharp crack from a lightning strike not too far from where she was now. Ellen looked towards the sky in protest. No, please no, not rain, not right now. I have to find Marvin first. Ellen began to run down the path again, knowing there wasn't much time, and it was several miles to a forest preserve area where she knew Marvin had most likely gone. Desperation gripped her heart, and the realization that her best friend could be hurt caused her to feel despondent and helpless to resolve the situation. She shook herself, casting aside all negative feelings, and continued her search, not considering herself. I will find him. I know I will. Marvin observed the beautiful scenery basking in the radiant colors of spring as they were navigating the boat down the river. So now he's back with John on the boat. If you remember last chapter, John had helped Marvin get into the boat, and they were going down the river because John was going to get him to safety. At least that's what we think. We don't know who John is really at this moment. He could be real, could be fake, could be an angel, could be imaginary friend. riverside. He loved this part of the woods, and he was sure he would enjoy staying here. Marvin was trying not to worry about the trip down the river, but he couldn't understand why they were going so far. He thought they were only going to cross straight over. John, if that's truly your name.
Yes, it is.
Well, I only needed to cross over to the other side. I don't need to go this far down the river. John had adjusted his body so that he could look over his shoulder. Then, giving a pleasant smile in return to Marvin's light protest, he said, "Trust me, Marvin, you will cross over. Just not the way you had anticipated, that's all." Marvin didn't quite understand the vague statement this mysterious stranger had just made. But once again, his spirit was affirmed in him. He could sense somehow that this was the right thing to do. Thunder was rumbling from the clouds overhead, and a mist was starting to form and rise off the water from the cold air. Marvin felt really cold all of a sudden. He wrapped his coat around him. Then, as quickly as the cold came, it subsided. This struck him as odd. The atmosphere was intensely static, charged with abundant electrical activity. There was a great number of thundering and lightning strikes in various places throughout the area. Rain started to fall lightly on the two wayfarers as they forfeitlessly I apologize, guys. I am not a reader. I truly do apologize. I'm doing my best. Effortlessly rode down the river for what seemed to be hours. Even though only minutes had passed, it seemed like time stood still, just for the sake of mental and spiritual absorption of all God's glorious creation before them. Marvin felt at peace with his Creator and himself, here in this grand beauty. Marvin became curious, not scared, just a bit curious, as to where his guide was taking them. "John, when are we going to the other side of the river?"
Marvin, be patient. We'll be there soon. In fact, I think we are there now. Hold on to the sides of the boat. It could get a little rough ahead," he said, pointing downstream.
John navigated their little boat through a wide turn in the river. Marvin could see a thick fog that seemed to block the entrance to a steep gorge that the river flowed through. The rock cliff of the gorge went almost straight up. Never had he seen something like this in that area before. It seemed so dark and foreboding. The dense fog blocked the top of the ledges, almost giving him the impression that they continued upward forever. Marvin could hear the sound of rapids ahead, but he couldn't see anything because the fog was too dense. The rain began to pour down on the boat in torrents. It seemed odd that the fog wouldn't break with the hard rain as it normally would. Marvin's mind was full of thoughts, and a terror stirred in his heart. "John, what's happening?" he shouted, but there was no answer. John maneuvered the boat so it would enter straight into the rapids. He seemed very confident in his ability to manage the situation. He must travel this way quite often, Marvin thought. Lightning struck a few times around the boat as they were closing in on the thick fog, jostling the boat side to side with the powerful impacts. Marvin was completely terrified now. It seemed like all nature was using them for target practice. They entered the thick fog, and the boat was tossed to and fro through the rapids as they floated through the rocky course. "John!" Marvin yelled out, terror-stricken by what was befalling them.
"Marvin, hang on. Don't let go. No matter what happens, don't let go of the boat."
Marvin held on with everything he had. Suddenly there was a great calm, almost as if someone had simply shut everything off with a switch. The rapids had ended, and the boat was once again drifting effortlessly. There was a strange warmth in the air, unlike anything he had ever felt. When the fog cleared, he noticed suddenly that he was no longer in Weston Falls. In fact, Marvin had never seen anything like this before, except in magazines or travel guides for Speechless, for the moment was spectacular. He gazed in amazement at all the scenery. Trees that looked like avocado, or maybe large ficus, he wasn't sure, and some of the strange-looking trees that loomed over the banks. Each tree had what seemed like dozens of roots that held the tree up out of the water like boat beer bowls. The stream was murky and green, not like the crystal clear waters of the big woods. And the ferns were the biggest that he had ever seen, kind of like miniature palm trees, and the flowers looked like the largest tiger lilies in the world. Marvin's curiosity got the best of him. He just had to ask, "John, where in the world are we?" John looked back towards Marvin and smiled. "Well, Marvin, you may not believe this, but we're now in Cambodia, next to Laos and Vietnam." The shock and disbelief were more than he could take. He couldn't come back with any witty comments or even question John further. He felt overtaken by the whole situation. Where's this guy taking me? This can't possibly be Cambodia. He's some kind of loony. As Marvin dwelled on the thought, there was suddenly a large bombshell strike, uncomfortably close to the boat. Shrubs, mud, and water flew into the air, accompanied by a few seconds of rapid fire with machine guns on the left side of the river. "That's the Viet Cong with some of the U.S. troops in crossfire," John said, pointing towards the skirmish. At this point, Marvin was more than terrified. He was crouched down tightly in the bottom of the boat, with his hands over his head. John yelled back towards Marvin in the midst of all the barrage of incoming mortar shelling and firing. "Don't worry, they can't see us. No one can." Marvin wasn't convinced by John's comment. It didn't make any sense. How could they not see them? They were right in the middle of the river. More shelling came down, this time landing only a few yards from the boat. The boat suddenly tossed out of the water, with the two of them tossed out, and the two of them tossed out as well, right into the river. The shock awoke Marvin out of his fear and into adrenaline-assisted panic. He popped up out of the surface of the water and then caught sight of John passing him in a graceful forward stroke. "Swim for it, Marvin. This way to the left bank. Follow me." Marvin couldn't swim, but under duress, he surprisingly made it out of the river quite swiftly. His sudden ability was quite shocking to him, almost surreal. Soon the two of them were sitting on the shore, soaked from the unexpected swim. The gunfire had stopped now. John patted Marvin on the back. "Well, you didn't do so badly. In fact, you did great. That's what I'd call swimming lessons 101, John said with a big grin on his face. How many of you guys growing up, your mom or dad or your guardian, whoever it was that was raising you, taught you how to swim and they threw you into the pool? I know mine did. I feel like this day and age would probably be, especially here in America, you'd probably get in trouble for doing that. Probably some form of child abuse, but things were a lot different when I was a kid. Yeah, that's how I learned how to swim. I got tossed in the pool. You learn real quick. Definitely takes the fear out of it. Marvin stared at him, looking quite upset. "What are you trying to do to me? We almost got blown up." "Oh, did we? You're soaked, and you kind of look like a wet rat in a way, but you are very much alive, if you hadn't noticed," he said quite smugly. "Why are you doing this? And how did you get us all the way to Cambodia from the woods?" John looked at Marvin, seemingly very amused by his question. "It's the answer to your prayer, remember? You wanted to help somehow, didn't you? Well, now you've been given the opportunity to do that very thing. You see, we have transported to Vietnam for that very purpose, to help your father." Marvin couldn't believe his ears. How could he be transported to Vietnam in a rowboat of all things? Then he remembered the fog that went
remember. John explained everything to Marvin, saying, "You see, this is your opportunity, an answer to a prayer from your mother and yourself. You wanted to be able to do something to help your dad, and, well, here we are," John said, throwing his hands in the air and smiling. Marvin looked at John with a skeptical eye, asking, "Who or what are you?" "Well, if you must really know, I'm an angel," he said with a grin on his face. "You mean my guardian angel?" "Well, if that's what you want to call me, but actually there are many of us watching over you. We are your circumstances in life that keep you safe. We pull you out of situations that otherwise would end in tragedy. You and I are going to do something like that for your father today. He needs us right now, and we'll create the circumstances in his life to help enable him his safe return home." Marvin couldn't believe his ears. Did this man, angel, or whatever he claimed to be, really know where his dad was? "You know where my dad is?" "Well, of course I do. Do you think I would have gone through all this trouble getting you here if I didn't? Okay, show me my dad. Please, I want to see him right now." "Now, patience, young man. We'll be there in a little while. I think we had better get going, though, before the next round of shelling starts. We have several miles to cover in a short period of time." Marvin stood there staring at John as he walked off, still unsure if any of this is really true or real. Then another shell hit the riverbank, exploding water and mud through the air from the powerful blast, convincing him that it would be adventurous. Jeez, I apologize, guys. It would be advantageous to follow his angelic friend, and quickly. Marvin ran up to John, surprised by how fast he could walk. He walked rapidly, trying to keep pace with the long-legged man. He was tall, probably 6 feet or so, gray-haired and fair-complexioned. He had a kindly face and often smiled when he looked at Marvin. If for nothing else, it was just to help him have more faith. The walking pace was a bit unnatural for Marvin, so to protest such an activity was surely anticipated. "Hey, John, why do we have to walk? Can't you just, I don't know, zap us where he is, or whatever it is that you said? Whatever it is you said was done to get us here before." "Well, I'm sure it could be done, but the jungle is just so beautiful this time of year. Come on." Marvin followed close behind John as they made their way through some of the densest shrubbery he had ever experienced. Marvin often left the path in the woods to enjoy the more natural scenery during his visits. This was far woodier than what he was used to. Then they walked out of the dense shrubbery and in under the cover of the forest trees. Here the going was a bit easier. The shrubs were sparse under the cover of the overpopulation of trees. He had to ask, "What are these trees called?" John looked up to the thick cover, saying, "They are mangroves, a common tree in these parts. Why do you ask?" "Oh, I'm just curious," Marvin replied cheerily. Then they arrived at a road that looked like it had been well traveled by trucks and by foot. There was evidence of truck tire prints in the dirt road and boot tracks everywhere. This is obviously an important road of some sort, Marvin deducted in his mind. "Where are we?" Marvin asked. "It's the Ho Chi Minh Trail. It's the easiest route to get to the BOW camp. It would take us days to get there through that jungle." "What does that mean?" "What? What you just said? What? BOW?" "Yes," Marvin said, looking puzzled. "Oh, it means prisoner of war." Marvin couldn't believe his ears. "Wait." Marvin grabbed John by the arm, stopping him with all he had. "Are you telling me that my dad is in a prisoner camp?" "Nope, He's not there yet. That is why we have to hurry. Time is of the essence. Marvin looked very puzzled by the statement. Well, if time is of the essence, then why are we walking? John looked at his clever young guest and smiled, crossing his arms. Well, Dr. Pickering, the situation is this. It's all in God's time. If I were to transport us now, we would be there too soon, and the event would be ruined. Marvin looked very confused by this statement, trying to decipher its meaning, but it became convoluted in his mind. In simplified terms, Doctor, we must be obedient to God's will. Thus, we are walking. So let's be off. No time to dwaddle. No time to dawdle. Jeez Louise. They proceeded down the road for what seemed like an hour. Marvin was quiet. He was not sure what to say. It's going to be a long chapter, guys. It's like over 20 pages long. How the news he had received caused him delight and great concern all at the same time. He smiled and a smile spread across his face as his hope renewed in him. My dad is alive. He sped up his pace from his renewed strength, passing by John in a short jog. Hey, hold your horses there, young fellow. John shouted, running to catch up to his energetic young friend. Marvin's dad was tossed about in the back of a Russian-built military truck with several other BOW soldiers en route to the Sunday prison compound 20 miles west of Hanoi. Jay Pickering was an excellent addition to the armed services, an extremely intelligent man, well-liked and respected by everyone. He was a tall man with distinct features, curly red hair, blue eyes, and a pale complexion, and a stout, muscular physique. He had always been an active young man, involved in sports and all sorts of outdoor activities. Wrestling and baseball were his athletic preferences when he was in high school. Now, while in Vietnam, he endured every imaginable and unimaginable test of his wits and strength, and enjoyed every minute of it. He loved his work in the Army. It was invigorating and fulfilling to him. He knew he was doing his part to help, both in service to his country and reaching out to people, even if it meant risking his life. While sitting and jostling around in the bed of the truck, bumping along down the pothole-riddled road. Sounds like California. The pothole-riddled road, his memory kept daunting him. His mind took him back to the incident of Saigon, where his plight had begun. The Tet Offensive was in operation. The sounds of war radiated from the region with gunfire, grenade launch explosions, shouts and screams of men giving their lives for what they believed to be a good cause. The American forces were doing everything they knew possible to stay out of the Viet Cong. The enemy charged like massive waves of humanity. There were hundreds and thousands of self-sacrificing enemy forces, relentless to the barrage of U.S. gunfire. The slaughter at the embassy was bloody and horrifying. Yet they took back the city, one small piece at a time. Jay Pickering was in Saigon when the Cong infiltrated the South Vietnam capital. He was running munitions from where the various outfits of his convoy was ambushed close to the Laos/Vietnam border. Jay Pickering had jumped from the truck and ran out in front of a Viet Cong gunman in order to give his life for the sake of the 3 U.S. soldiers sitting in the back of the supply truck, giving them hope and the opportunity to escape. Jay knew what the VC wanted. They wanted weapons. I surrender. Don't shoot. He yelled, quickly throwing up his hands. Two of the guerrillas grabbed Jay, knocked him to the ground, and then pointed their guns toward his head. He thought for sure he was going to be executed right at that moment. The other guerrillas ran towards the back of the truck to check the contents. Suddenly, several rounds of gunfire erupted from the back of the truck. Then the sound of flailing arms
and bodies falling to the ground. Jay had heard those sounds from what seemed like hundreds of times. He had thought for sure his comrades lost their lives, even after his attempt to save them. Just then, 3 American soldiers ran out to fight off the enemy guerrillas. The enemy, noticing their demise, then pointed both of their guns towards Jay. They told the American soldiers in their Vietnamese tongue to back off or they would take his life. The 3 American soldiers kept their guns pointing at them, realizing they had a standoff. Jay told his American friends, "It's okay, boys. Let them go. You're alive, and that's all that counts. Just let them go." The guerrillas lifted Jay from the ground, keeping their guns to his head and chest. They slowly backed away from the American soldiers, holding Jay as ransom. Once they lost sight of the Americans, they took Jay with them to their command post just outside the Laos border. Jay thought about the inevitable moment. The boys should have shot anyway. Even though he contemplated that thought, he was glad to be alive. There was still hope of seeing his family again, even though his life was spared. The memory of all the stories he had heard of torture and hardship in the POW compounds gave him a sick feeling in the gut. It caused him to wonder if death would have been a blessing. He knew he would be in for some insurmountable trouble. Having worked for the recon units, he knew all the ins and outs of the radio communications. He knew all the secret codes and the dialogues that the NBA would have would love to have securely in their vindictive little hands. There was no way he would allow them to even think he retained any such knowledge. He convinced himself that even death wouldn't sever his loyalty to his country. The POW truck was traveling through Laos under the cover of darkness. Having just crossed over the 17th parallel, Jay knew it would only be about 8 or 10 hours or so until they arrived at the Red River in Vietnam. Then the interrogation would begin and the torture. He could not believe the desperation of these people. He knew they were all nuts and had nothing to lose. The North Vietnamese people were very poor, and being in the military gave them as great a chance of any as surviving. A great chance of survival as not serving. Even so, Jay knew that they had to hate the trip as badly as the U.S. soldiers they were transporting. His trip up from the border was very dangerous. He could not even begin to count the bomb strikes that occurred during the ride. He did count the narrow escapes though, 9 close calls, including one that blew the tarp off the back of the first truck he rode in. That caused him to go into intercessory prayer. I don't know how to pronounce that word. I apologize, guys. Right then and there, Jay had been doing a lot of praying along the way up the wild, bumpy road. The whole situation was terrifying to everyone on board. It was astounding to him that these guerrillas did all of this for a measly 3 bowls of rice per day. John and Marvin walked for what seemed like days, even though it had only been hours. He dodged utility trucks. Oh yeah, we got like 11 more pages. I'm gonna take a drink. This is a lot for me, guys. I'm not the best reader, and I have a really bad ADD and ADHD, so this is like so tough. It's like really hard for me to just like sit here and focus, but I'm doing my best. I want to bring you guys some different content, so give me a like if I'm doing okay, because I'm like putting everything I have right now mentally into just like focusing and reading. I might make this a part 2, maybe, I don't know. It's a lot of reading, we're not even halfway done. was as they traveled along the side of the road, Marvin had a hard time convincing himself that he was invisible. It just would not register in his brain. Sometimes when he would see a truck coming, he would jump off the road into the thick brush to hide. On one occasion, he jumped off the road right into a small creek. That mistake soaked him from head to toe. John laughed. It was the first time he had heard him laugh. I don't find anything funny about it. Marvin scowled in disapproval. Oh, come on, take my hand. John helped Marvin out of the mire and back onto the road. Nighttime came upon them rapidly under the mangroves, but the two kept walking. Marvin was surprised that he was strong enough for the journey. He usually would have tired long ago. The night air was muggy and warm, not like the air back home. John stopped Marvin, saying, "Get ready to step off the side of the road." "Why? What's happening?" "The truck is coming." Marvin could not perceive what John was talking about. The truck. Many trucks had passed them by on this dusty dirt road, and Marvin wondered what was so special about this one. "Just do as I say, Marvin. Get out the road, now." Marvin, once again, jumped off to the side of the road, hiding in a brush. John did not come with him this time. Marvin peeked out of the brush to see what was going on. John was standing in the middle of the road with his hand straight out, making him take the shape of a crucifix. A large grain utility truck rounded the curve in the road about 300 yards away from where John was standing. Then the most unusual thing happened. While John stood there, his whole countenance began to glow with radiant blue and white light, almost like a star. The truck was speeding down the road and then suddenly swerved violently, almost tipping over. The driver stared at the apparition in terror, causing his eyes to pop out the size of golf balls. He slammed on the brakes violently, stopping the truck. Truck sideways in the middle of the road, only a few yards from where John was glowing radiantly. The NVA driver and his passenger both climbed out of the truck and shuffled slowly towards the glowing figure, staring almost as if in a trance. They stopped and looked straight at John, now so terrified they could barely breathe. John stared at them and said, "Boo." As he let out a wave of light as bright as the sun, the two men fell backwards, scrambling over one another, trying to escape from the apparition. They ran away from the truck, wailing loud screams of terror, stumbling and running down the road as fast as they could. Just then, two remaining NVA gunmen jumped from the back of the truck, with guns flailing, wondering what all their erratic driving and screaming was all about. They rounded the back of the truck and caught sight of John standing there in the road, glowing in waves of light. The NVA became so horribly terrified by the phantom that one of the gunmen dropped his rifle and fainted dead away. The other just stood there in shock, staring, unable to move a muscle in his body. John started walking towards the last standing gunman, and the NVA soldier let out a blood-curdling stream, dropping his rifle, and ran down the road screaming hysterically. John looked down the road, saying aloud to Marvin, "I think that one's gonna need therapy for sure." Marvin could not believe what he had just witnessed. It was the greatest thing he'd ever seen in his whole life. "Wow, how did you do that?" he asked in total amazement. "Oh, that's a simple thing for me. I do this 24/7 around God's throne." "Well, those guys didn't care for it much," Marvin said, giggling. They both shared a good laugh over the whole scenario. Jay had been looking out the back of the truck, watching as the NVA soldiers ran off down the road, as if they had just seen a ghost, leaving all the prisoners alone in the back of the truck like a bunch of cattle. "I don't believe it. What in the world scared them off?" he said, as he slowly and carefully climbed out the back of the truck. "What the?" said BFC Billings as he looked out of the back of the truck while Jay Pickering was climbing out. Then they all looked out the back of the truck, perceiving what had just happened. They all huddled together looking out the road, staring at the abandoned truck.
What in the world happened, Sully?
I don't know, but I do know if we don't get out of here fast, whatever that is gonna go after us too. There's one problem with that. We are hundreds of miles from our base, and we can't use the truck. It's too risky. Marvin could not believe his eyes. His dad was alive. He ran over to his father, yelling, "Dad, Dad!" However, his father couldn't hear him. He tried to touch him, but his arm stopped before he could reach his father. "Marvin, I'm sorry. I had to stop you before you ruined everything." Marvin was very upset, and tears rolled down his cheeks. "I want him. I need my dad." "Marvin, you can't have him. Not yet. Soon you'll see him again. You just have to trust me." Marvin put his arms around John and wept. John looked at him and said, "Marvin." Slowly he looked up at John with tears rolling down his face. "It's your turn to help your father. You have to be strong now. Are you ready to do this?" "Yes, I think so," he said, trying to hold back the tears. "Well then, this is what you need to do. Go to the driver's side of the truck." "What good would that do?" Marvin retorted. "You'll see. Just listen to me carefully, okay?" Marvin gave a short nod of approval. "Go right down on the ground a scripture, Philippians 4:13, right in front of the driver's side of the door. Once your father is standing by the side of that truck, drop a rock on the running board so he'll notice it." Marvin looked confused. "Are you sure this is going to work?" "Everything has worked so far, hasn't it?" "Well, yes. I guess I'll give it a try then." Jay spoke up to the men, pulling rank on them because he was the master sergeant of the group. "We have to get into that truck, guys, and get going. This is the only way to get back to Saigon without walking the entire distance." One of the soldiers spoke up. "But Sarge, that will be twice as dangerous. The NVA travels this road constantly. We'll never make it." Jay was looking quite angry at this statement and retorted, "Bryant, shut up. Get into the back of the truck. That goes for the rest of you too. Get in that truck. Now, McNally, you'll ride in the front with me." Jay turned and walked towards the driver's side of the truck. Just then, there was a small banging sound. A rock about the size of a golf ball fell down off the roof of the truck, hitting the running board and dropping to the ground only a few feet in front of Jay. The odd happening took Jay by surprise, and he quickly dropped to the ground in panic, thinking it was a bullet. McNally had seen what had happened and slid over to the driver's side, the driver's seat, looking out the door at Jay, who was now staring at something on the ground. "Jay, are you all right? What happened?" "Oh, shoot, it was only a rock." McNally started laughing. The fact that a rock terrified Jay was more than he could handle. Jay was going to return McNally's sarcasm with a stern correction, but something distracted him. He noticed writing in the dirt. Jay was very puzzled by what he was seeing on the ground. "McNally, is there a flashlight in the truck or something? I see what looks like writing on the ground." "What? Are you crazy or something?" Jay raised his voice. "Just look, will you?" McNally rummaged around inside the truck, trying to find a flashlight or matches or anything that would shine a light onto the writing Jay had described. Just then there was a sound of a small gunshot, and the sky lit up from the luminescence of a fiery red glow overhead. "It's a flare, Pickering. Let's get out of here." It's gotta be the NVA patrol," McNally said in a low but strained voice. He could not move. Jay froze in place, staring at the writing on the ground. "I don't believe it. How in the world did that get there? Pickering, we gotta go, man." Jay stood up, looking down at the writing as he walked slowly towards the truck. He climbed into the driver's side of the driver's seat of the Russian-built utility truck, started it, and placed it into gear, spinning the tires slightly as he accelerated them out of the range of their enemies. A look of disbelief and shock was on his face, causing his passenger no small concern. "Pickering, what is it, man? What did you see?" Jay stared straight ahead, not moving for a few seconds, and then spoke. It said, Philippians 4:13. What in the dickens is that supposed to mean? I can do all things through Christ that strengthens me, Jay said as he shifted the truck into another gear. It's an answer to my prayers. It's what? McNally looked at Jay, questioning his sanity for a moment, and then turned his gaze to looking out the windshield. He wouldn't dare say anything out loud to him. Jay was bigger and much stronger than him. He decided at best he just dropped the subject. He could tell it really disturbed bickering. Meanwhile, back down the road, John and Marvin had a joyful dance when they noticed how everything fell into play just as planned. When Marvin's father had started to enter the truck, John took Marvin by the hand. Come on, we gotta get to that truck before they leave. John and Marvin ran for the truck and then hopped into it onto the back of the tailgate just as it started to move. Marvin didn't question John's reasoning for going with the soldiers, even though it did cross his mind. Actually, he wanted to be with his father and see him through the entire journey. The storm back at Western Falls was intensifying. The rain had been pouring on the wood relentlessly. The ground was so wet to the point that it had made travel entirely difficult. In spite of the storm, Ellen was determined to find Marvin. She had reached the area of the wood that he talked about, but she found no sign of Marvin. Dear God, please help me find Marvin. Please help me find him soon. She was traveling through the heavily wooded area, not far from the river. The foliage was quite thick, making it difficult at best to follow the path. It was not much bigger than a deer trail, and slippery in the spots where it was absent of ground cover. The storm erupted with great flashes of light and loud cracks from the lightning. Then a great flash and explosion sounded. A lightning struck a tree only a few yards from Ellen. Its deadly charge swept instantaneously across the wet ground and through her small frame, tossing her through the air and then onto the ground from the high-voltage shock. The rain continued to fall mercilessly on her now motionless body. A small fire started at the base of the tree where the lightning had struck, but it was soon extinguished by the torrential downpour. Suddenly, almost cruelly, a large branch, torn by the violent force of the shock, had broken off of the tree, falling to the ground directly on top of Ellen, smothering her with its foliage. All was quiet. Only the sound of raindrops remained, almost as if nature had finished its course, and there was no further need to continue the raging tumult. The sheriff answered the call on his radio from the station. Sheriff, this is Base. Do you copy? This is the sheriff. Go ahead. Miss Peterson just called. Said her daughter ran from the house towards the woods. She thinks the girl is going to try to find Marvin Pickering. The sheriff looked towards the ground in disbelief. Foolhardy kids, he said, looking very concerned. What in the world is that girl doing, Sheriff? What shall we tell Miss Peterson? The voice from dispatch retorted. Tell her we'll start a search ASAP, but it's not going to be easy. The storm is dropping rain pretty hard now. It's getting hard just to travel through these woods. Okay, Sheriff, 10-4, 10-29 out. Okay, boys, we got us a big problem on our hands now. It appears that the Peterson girl decided to go looking for Marvin too. We'll have to split up into two parties. One party will have to work their way due south towards the main road, and then head west towards the river. After you get to the river, work your way back up until you meet the rest of us, or find the kid. The remainder of us will continue west until we get to the river. Then we'll work our way back down. The men agreed. Miller, you take the three groups and go southwest of us. Go south, the rest of us will go the other way. Miller agreed, assembled his groups, and went on their way. The sheriff and his party continued on their route. Why in the world did these kids have to go and do something stupid like this anyway? The sheriff complained, but his concern for their welfare was even greater than before. Where in the world is this kid? He questioned, looking at the trail ahead. He trod through the mire. The rain was pouring down in torrents, and the travel was hard, even for the most rigorous of men. The search party continued on in spite of it all, determined to find Marvin and now Ellen. The sheriff grumbled under his breath. Kids! That's the sheriff right there. He doesn't seem too stoked. He's not too happy. Not too happy to be going through the rain, trying to look for these kids. And that is the end of chapter 4. So that was a pretty cool chapter. A long chapter, but it was a good chapter. Yeah, I appreciate you guys for sticking through this. I know, again, I am not the best reader, and sometimes pronunciation is tough for me. I mean, I'm not dumb. I'm a smart person. But my ADD and my ADHD, it's just like, it is so hard for me to focus on just sitting here and reading. But I want to do it for you guys again. But it is tough sometimes. Sometimes I start getting headaches from having to just sit in one place and just read. But yeah, I'm doing it for you guys. So again, drop a like if you appreciate me trying to do this and power through my issues to try to bring you guys some good content. Also, again, if you do want to check out the book, link will be in the description below. If you don't want to pay for the book, that's totally fine. You can just keep joining me here every time I post a video about this in this Let's Read series. There will be a playlist. There is already a playlist, but each video that I upload for this series will be placed into that playlist, so that way once the book is all done and it's all finished, you can go back and you can listen to each video and each chapter and go through the entire book. So like if you want to be able to fall asleep to it, if you like listening to people read to you while you sleep, this is a good option for that. And once the playlist is made, you'll be able to just play the entire playlist, so starting from chapter 1 all the way through 12. So I think that'll be a really good ASMR whisper series for people to help sleep and stuff throughout the night. I appreciate you guys. I love you guys. Don't forget that you are important, and you, me, we all have a specific purpose for being here on this earth in this particular lifetime. So don't forget that. Always remember to be extremely kind to everybody, even those that are not kind to you, and people that hate on you or do you dirty, whatever. Be kind to those people, because the universe or God, whoever it is, or whatever it is that you believe in, is watching you and taking notes. And as long as you keep doing good and treat people good, life will be good for you. I promise. That all being said, you've been watching ASMR Chic, and I am the one and only JJ, the Chic Prince. I love you guys. If you're falling asleep or trying to fall asleep, I hope you have sweet dreams, and enjoy that time in that beautiful dream world that we all love to go to. And if you have time in your day still, I hope you have a wonderful, successful, and stress-free day. Thank you guys for watching. I appreciate you guys. Love ya. Thank you. Thank you for watching.